Three, two, one.
Appreciate you coming on with us again, David. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Build and Grow with Real Estate show. My name is Judith, and Josh, in just a second or two, we've got with us again attorney David Lanza. And David has been with us before because we've had David on to talk about eviction, the moratorium on evictions here in Pennsylvania, and what is going on with that. I am driving back from an appointment, so I'm going to let Josh kind of handle this call here with us today. But you want to ask any questions of David, Josh is going to be watching the chat, so go ahead and post questions on evictions as they come up in the chat there. And Josh, I think that I should have good reception, but let's just count on you for steering this conversation today.
Yeah, 100%. So first of all, I love the ad-lib production of the show. As we're going on, Judith's giving me hints, and, hey, you got to watch the comments. I love it. So, David, listen, man, we had you here a month and a half ago, something like that, right?
In August, I think. In August.
That's right.
Maybe even July. Maybe.
It was middle of July.
It was either July 30th or like the very beginning of July. So, I mean, a lot has changed here going on since.
Well, the saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
That's right. And you know what's interesting is, David, you have the notoriety of being the highest and most watched of all of our guests.
Oh, no kidding. Well,
so that's a good thing. Well, tell me what's going on. What's going on in the world of eviction real estate?
Well, I guess what I want to do is try to bring you up to date with, for those that remember the conversation in July, the governor had placed a moratorium on evictions, and we talked about ways to continue to do business despite that, how to get around it, how to still be able to prosecute your cases if need be. Since then, the governor's moratorium expired at the end of August. Yep. And at the beginning of September, as probably many of you know, the Center for Disease Control imposed a new moratorium, which I don't believe they have the authority to do, but it was adopted by the local counties in Pennsylvania, which that makes it law. By local counties adopting it, it essentially becomes law as if it was valid. So it doesn't really matter anymore whether the CDC had jurisdiction. And it's similar to the governor's moratorium, but I think in many ways it's more difficult to get around. And I don't want to go into all the details of how it works because it's very confusing and a lot of it's unnecessary. But
well, that right there is an important distinction to make, dear listeners, because it doesn't matter whether you think the CDC does have jurisdiction, overstepped their bounds, didn't overstep their bounds. Doesn't matter if you like this, don't like it, whatever. Stop fighting that fight. Keep your powder dry. Save your emotion for other things. All you're doing is tilting at windmills and spitting into the wind. It doesn't make a difference. That's actually, I don't like that, but that's helpful for me as a rental property owner to frame that it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. It doesn't matter what you believe about the CDC. The local counties have pretty much unanimously adopted it. Therefore, that fight is over, and it's time to move on to other things. I appreciate you pointing that out to us, David. That was worth the price of admission right there.
Well, I agree. When you're dealing with the district justices, there are things you can do, and I'll get into that. And rather than don't fight with the DJs about whether it's valid. However, I do believe there are other forums to fight the issue of whether it's valid, and I think that's another matter. And I think we should do that, but that's not what I'm here to talk about today.
So
go ahead.
let's talk about first then the law, and we don't want to get real deep in the weeds.
Right.
What
All
are
right.
some of the things that are kind of murky and undefined? Let's put it there.
Well, let me start by saying one thing I think is important. This, if you take nothing else away from today, then this it'll be worth it. I believe that the landlords are going to have to start thinking about going month to month with all of their leases. I think that's something you have to seriously think about. That's one thing. The second thing is when you file a complaint for eviction, from now on, up until this year, landlords have been ignoring other violations, violations not related to rent. They haven't been filling out those spaces on the DJ complaint.
Yeah.
I'm referring specifically to Section 5. And I'm not going to, I can't show this on the screen, but I'm looking at it to be sure I'm correct. Yeah, Section 5 is the one where you list the violations unrelated to rent. And
Right.
there are typically cases where there are violations and the landlord does not bother filling it out.
Yeah.
And until this year, it didn't really do a lot of harm, but now it can kill your case.
Well,
So,
you know what's interesting about this?
Yeah.
You think about all of the things that are in a lease. There's 1,000,001 different things that puts
Yeah.
you in default on both sides of that agreement.
Yeah.
But usually, as long as the rent's being paid, all the other violations, unless it's like smoking in the house or like burning the property down, a lot of landlords, they can put up with that as long as they're getting their monthly rent. Right?
Sure.
Well, I'm saying just in general, that's what oftentimes happens. And so, what on the flip side of that, when the rent doesn't come in, collection of that rent is often the number one reason for eviction. It's not the secondary and tertiary stuff that now you're saying, hey, look, this is really where the hook is. This is where we need to be, right?
Yeah, I think this is, you can make the claim for rent all you want, but if the tenant does what he can do under the CDC guidelines, you're not going to be able to get them out.
Okay. So
I'd like to talk about that in some detail as we go on. But
yeah, please.
That's the basic idea. And if you're still not sure after this session, you have resources. If you're out there listening, you can talk to me. You can talk to you guys, the associations. But this is really where we have to begin. I'm talking about a drastic change in some cases, going month to month. But this is something you got to at least think about, and especially. A lot of leases expire after a year. They go month to month anyway.
Right. So what you're saying is you go with a month-to-month lease, and then that gives you the flexibility of saying, okay, the lease ends now, or here's your 30-day notice. You didn't pay your rent. Here's your 30-day notice. I'm terminating the lease.
Now, the thing is, I've got to be careful about this because that's true in some jurisdictions, and I'll get into that too.
Okay.
That's what makes this so complicated because not every jurisdiction is interpreting this the same way.
Okay. It's
really a county by county basis. The basic idea, though, what a tenant can do, there is a form that's provided by the CDC online.
Yep.
And actually in Dauphin County, there's a nonprofit group that sits outside every DJ office on eviction day, and they hand this form to your tenants, and they tell them, sign this form and you won't be evicted. At least not right now. And of course, they're going to sign it, whether it's true or not.
Right.
And the form says things like, you're not able to pay the rent due to loss of household income, illness, etc. If you're kicked out, you'll be homeless. You've made best efforts to pay the rent. You've made best efforts to keep up with the rent, with the land. You made partial payments.
Right.
And in many cases, these things are not true. In many cases, you're evicting someone who's not made any effort to pay you in months.
Right.
And the bad part about this is every jurisdiction I have spoken to has taken the same position. It's not up to the judges to determine whether the affidavit is true. They will not have a hearing on whether it's true. And there's actually an order from Dauphin County Court in September that says the local officials, the district justice office will not engage in that process. You believe they're lying, take it to the U.S. attorney, the federal U.S. attorney for prosecution.
Right.
And my opinion on that is, well, as soon as they solve all the murders, they'll get to dealing with fake affidavits.
Well, and that's kind of where I was going to go with this anyway, is like, look, if you're facing getting evicted out of your house, right?
Yeah.
And
you'll say anything.
You have enough honor to say, listen, I'm not going to lie about this stuff. The likelihood is you've already contacted that landlord. You've already at least said to them, look, this is my situation. And I don't, if you've got somebody that was really financially impacted here and is doing everything in their power to, to get their feet on the ground, I don't think there's one landlord out here, certainly that I know, that would just say, nah, get out of my property. You're done.
Right. That's true. They're working with the tenants that are working with them.
Right.
The cases that come to me are the cases mainly that they went bad before before March. They were already a problem. The main reason for eviction is violations of noise, breach of the peace, damaging the property.
Yep.
Those are the kind of people. It's a last resort. The people that are trying to catch up, the landlords are letting them. So if everything on this paper is true, they're usually not being evicted.
Exactly. I mean, people are understanding. So, all right. So now they sign this paperwork.
Yeah.
And the court system, it's not like they don't have anything else to do. They've got, 6 months of court filings that haven't been processed. They've got hearings. They got everything else. And so they're just not even going to look at these for whether they're factual or not.
No.
So you got to assume that it's true going in. So now what?
Well, what happens, what I'm seeing, at least in the cases I'm dealing with, I've had hearings in both York and Dauphin County the past few weeks. And in particular, what I think happens is you get your judgment. You'll win your case. Often the tenant won't even show up.
Yeah.
Just like before, you win your case. They present you the CDC declaration. They give it to you, the landlord, after the case is over. After you've won and you're having the constable kick them out, then they hand you the paper. You're required as a landlord to sign an affidavit saying, I've not gotten this paper from a tenant. And if you say you haven't got it and you have, then you're liable for all serious, like $500,000 in penalties plus in prison. That's the weight hanging over your head as a landlord. So you have to admit, yes, I got an affidavit saying, or I got a declaration from the tenant as set up by the CDC. At that point, the district justice office will simply punt. Well, I'm not involved anymore. This is done.
Yeah.
And where it becomes tricky, here is where it becomes tricky. Let's talk about Dauphin County. All of the DJs in Dauphin County agree, at least the last I heard, they all agree that an expired lease will not allow the tenant to file or to use the CDC declaration. If the lease is expired, it's removed from the whole CDC process. So,
you know what's crazy about this?
Yeah.
Judah, I'm sorry. Hold on, I was getting background noise out. Go ahead.
Let him finish that point.
Okay.
So David, finish
All
that
right,
point.
so in Dauphin County, the DJs will agree. You have a 30-day lease, or if you have an expired 1-year lease, whatever the term, they will not pay attention to the CDC declaration. Same is true of violations like damage, noise, smoking, etc. It's all treated the same way. The problem is you've had your hearing and you have won before the declaration's ever presented. And in many cases, the judge, the person who's deciding whether to send the constable to the unit to evict the tenant, to finish the eviction, they don't know what went on in the hearing. They don't know the basis for the decision. Right. They don't know if this case has been removed or not. I had a hearing in New York yesterday where the judge, I brought this up with the judge, and she left a note in the file. She said to us specifically, I'm putting a note in the file. We have an expired lease. Well, she didn't use the expired lease, and I'll get to that in a moment too. another wrinkle, but I'm putting a note in the file that we have violations, and that was the basis. So if a call comes in, if a declaration comes in, anyone looking at the file will know that they should ignore it because this case dealt with violations. But she did say you'll proceed at your own peril because of the federal statute or federal regulations do say you face fines or imprisonment if you're lying, if you're the landlord. So, but still, in this case, I think this is going to be okay, although we'll see how it plays out. We'll see if the clerk makes a mistake. Now, I mentioned this was in York County. I was told that the York County judges do not recognize that expiration of the lease it takes it out of the CDC moratorium. So York is treating it differently from Dauphin County. And it's not just the individual DJs. In York, this comes from the president judge at the county level. And I believe, as far as in Dauphin County, I don't think it actually was written down by the president judge. It was something that they all simply agree upon because they all take the same seminars and they all confer.
Well, and do you think that with all of this stuff that is going on, we're gonna have to have this progress beyond the local courts and somebody challenged the law in such a way that there's a ruling that now takes precedent for every lower court?
Well, what I think is going to happen, I haven't had this happen yet, but there's going to be some of these cases going up on appeal. I've had a little more than a half a dozen cases since the CDC moratorium. Yeah. I don't think any of them have been appealed yet, but they may be. Yeah. I'm still expecting that. But the point is, at some point, we're going to go before the Common Pleas Court, and maybe we can get some clarification. Although I think they're going to dig their heels in to what they've already established. Well,
and I think too that you got a really interesting dynamic going on in our country right now because of the election that's coming up next week. I think there's a lot more mainstream coverage of some of these issues in a way that is much more tenant friendly, and is certainly productive. It's always like the single mother who is working her way through medical school and like she's $15 late and 24 hours past the due date, and all of a sudden her stuff's on the front lawn of the house.
I can tell you the cover at the end of August, when the governor's moratorium was about to expire and they were pushing for the legislature to pass their own, which they didn't do, but the news coverage essentially was on August 31st or September 1st, there's going to be a wave of evictions. Thousands of people will be homeless across Pennsylvania. 30 to 40% people were throwing around that number, and it's just false. I have talked to numerous landlords. Some of them have many units. They're getting 95, 98% collection rates. I've talked to some of the district justice offices. They had a few cases, a few more than normal. Those first few days of September, just a few more. But you consider they were unable to take cases basically for 5 months.
Yeah.
So that accounted for the small increase. There really hasn't been this large wave.
Well, and I think that's there's two sides to that coin. On the one side, because we had this moratorium, I think it caused landlords to be a lot more accepting on things than they would be in the past. And maybe it gave the people a little bit of time to work it out. But on the flip side of that, I think tenants, if they're smart, are looking around and saying, there's 4 houses like the one that I want that are for rent in my backyard. There's not a lot of good rental inventory because the good rental houses that were vacant, they got sold. Somebody said, "Oh, the house is worth $50,000 more now than it was, when I started the summer. Let's get rid of it." So I think that you have a dwindling inventory of good housing.
Yeah.
And you've got good tenants that are looking around and like, "Hey, look, this is a pretty nice house. I want to stay here. If I don't treat my landlord, in a proper manner, I'm going to lose this place and probably have to pay out the nose for something not nearly as nice as what I've got."
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think also landlords are telling me they're going to be much more strict on who they accept,
Yeah.
who they don't accept. They're going to require higher credit ratings just to avoid this kind of nightmare.
Yeah.
Because I think eventually this CDC moratorium is supposed to last till the end of December, but we all know they're going to roll it over into the new year.
Yep.
And it depends partly on the election too, but I think this is something that's going to be with us for the foreseeable future, because they're telling us the virus will be with us and the mask requirements will be with us.
Yeah.
They're not going to repeal this. And so we're going to have to adjust. We're going to have to get used to the idea that this is with us for whether it's merited or not.
Yeah.
The bureaucrats say so, and this is what we have to. And this is what's funny too. This is not something that's been legislatively decided. It's not something that reflects the will of the people. I even had, when I was speaking to one of the reporters at the beginning of September about the CDC moratorium, and it's not in effect until it gets adopted by the local courts. And she said to me, well, the Pennsylvania legislature is pretty conservative. I don't see them adopting this. I said, it's not up to them. It's up to the bureaucrats who populate the administrative office of Pennsylvania courts. They come up with guidelines, and the DJs were kind of waiting for them. And it really wasn't forthcoming, which I was gratified to see. But then what did happen was that the county courts adopted their own rulings about this, improvising this. They talked to each other, but there was never really any consensus among the population as to what we're going to do or whether we're going to do this. This is something that can continue bureaucratically really forever.
Well, and I don't, without going down the political rabbit hole.
Right.
Now, I think it's fair enough to say that, like, every time government acts, there's an unintended consequence that, or maybe an intended consequence.
Well, I think intended sometimes, but go ahead.
Right, exactly. Whatever the case might be, there's always a consequence that isn't part of the pitch, and with something like this, I'm used to, so my background's from Philadelphia, where I've seen eviction timelines go from 45 days start to close to 90 days to, we'll see when it happens. Literally with no clear timeline. And I think that, you look in the suburbs where, sometimes it's 14 or 30 days. It's like, look, you're out, you're done, we move on. That's a much different dynamic. We may as a society be gravitating toward a longer eviction time frame. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing.
Well, that's going to have consequences in the marketability of the property, the availability of housing to the rest of us, the expense. It's going to result in additional expense for rental housing. Rates are going up because we're paying for those. It only takes a very few bad tenants to eat up all your profits for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
And that's what the rest of us are going to be paying for. Anyone that rents property and is a good tenant. And I think homeowners too, if it's more expensive to rent property, it'll be more expensive to buy property, ultimately.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? Across the board, though, I think that what we're seeing, I've had this vacillating opinion of, like, why is the market so high? And there's so many factors, but I think one that is not going to go away is the fact that there is 2 or 3 trillion extra dollars in our money supply since the beginning of this year.
Yes.
And that money's got to go somewhere. Where's it going? It's going into assets right now. But I think that's going to trickle all the way down. If properties are more expensive to build and to buy, well, if you're going to lease a part of that building, you can expect to pay more. It's just, it may take some time to trickle down, but I think we're going to see that kind of elevation in rents for sure coming in the future. And really, I think it's just going to be a function of inflation, if anything else.
Well, what you're describing is inflation.
Right.
A couple trillion more dollars, that means prices are going up.
Yeah, exactly.
We've seen it, and I don't know what to say. I think ultimately the solution is we have to get past this mentality that we've had the past 6 months. I have become more and more skeptical every month about the whole thing. the longer we go on.
Yeah.
It was 14 days to flatten the curve, and now it's 7 months later.
and the curve is as flat. The curve might be up, but the death rate is way down.
Yes.
Thank God that we,
Yeah.
Thank goodness we're just fighting the government and not everything.
Yeah.
And not, a virus that kills everybody.
It's not really the end of the world. It's just
Right.
people who think it is.
It's a fire drill. It's a
Yeah.
fire drill for the end of the world. I'm going to use that line in the future.
Okay. So I hope I didn't confuse too many people with what the process.
It sounds to me like the process depends on where you're at.
Yeah, and yes, it does. And the thing is, the judges are not sure themselves.
Yeah.
What I explained to you that happened yesterday in my hearing, that was something the judge kind of improvised.
Yeah.
Based on the fact that I was asking the question. And I think that's part of what you have to do too. If you're at a hearing with a judge, ask what's going to happen if they provide an affidavit later on.
Right.
And hey, we have violations. And this is something she said, this is important too. She made reference to the idea, the judge understood, that landlords may be coming up with minor violations just for the purpose of getting you out of the CDC moratorium. So I would think most judges are going to be looking for substantial violations, or at least an explanation of why this is important. And there are good reasons for enforcing the rules. You mentioned earlier, landlords have been willing to live with it if they get the rent. But the truth is, there are good reasons, bad landlords that do that. Those are some of the bad landlords, because if you have one tenant making noise or damaging things, it reverberates to the rest of your community.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly right.
So let me jump in here and see if I can. Summarize this. So what you're saying is, we need to, because of this eviction moratorium for lack of payment, we need to focus on actual violations and end of lease termination, and that we might want to move to a position temporarily or medium term, maybe even potentially long term, where we do month-to-month leases instead of annual leases, so that you can terminate the lease at the end of any 1 month. And that we need to, when we're filing for eviction, go after damages, but specifically make sure that they're real and meaningful damages. And the other thing that I would say is this, people, dear listeners, you want to document. I told them about, the lease violations because of damages on this date and this date. And I told them about it in this way and this way. And they communicated back to me that they were going to have it fixed by this time. And that time came and went, and they still didn't do anything. Therefore, my only recourse is to file for eviction.
Right.
And they might, and at that point, they might even again be told, you've got, the judge might say, well, you've got 30 days to cure these problems, and you might need to file again, but you're going to have to start working through real and meaningful damages and documenting when and how communication happened and the timeline for it.
I'll give a couple comments about that. First of all, one item that comes up that often people don't think about, you should require your tenants to have renter's insurance, especially liability insurance. Yeah. And a lot of them don't get it. And that's a substantial thing, because that's you're talking about the potential for fire damage, the cost out of your pocket for your own deductible. That's very important, and it's something that you can put in writing. Hey, if you haven't given me proof that you have renter's insurance and that I'm named as a additional loss payee, that's not something minor. But the second thing, what you're describing, Judah, I see this all the time in the world of manufactured housing communities, mobile home communities, where they are on the tenants all the time about things that would seem at first glance to be minor, but they're not. Like this skirting around the bottom of the home. If it's dirty, if it's bent, if it's broken at all, if there's gaps, they get a letter, and they're required by law to send 2 violation letters in a 6-month period before they can seek eviction. The people who work in this industry, they're very well aware of this, and they have this down to a science. They're constantly inspecting their communities. They notice whether there's a car without a current inspection sticker, registration. Yeah. They're sending letters out. And the reason they do this is because, number one, if one person violates these rules, they cannot enforce it again. They can't discriminate. They can't enforce against some and not others. So if they're allowing one person to do this, the whole community goes downhill. I think the same thinking should apply if you have multi-unit, non-mobile home houses, regular apartment complexes, or a 4-unit. Same thinking applies. And you can make the case. You should be willing to testify to the judge about things like curb appeal, and marketability, and the fact that you're going to be re-renting other units in the building, and you can't have a noisy tenant, you can't have a messy tenant, garbage strewn around the property, broken windows. You have to be on top of it. You have good reason to be on top of it. I don't think enough landlords do this, and I think sometimes the judges may tend to take lightly these claims. We got to change that.
It's really interesting that you brought this up, because I have been around. I mean, I used to have a property management company. We managed over 600 units. I've been to eviction court more than my fair share. Yeah. I have never heard that discussion ever. Sure. Where it's like, look, I got to get rid of this person. It's always, I feel like it always comes down to dollars and cents. Like, okay, they haven't paid. But what you're saying makes a ton of sense in giving a real reason why. Like, it's not like they're just not paying the rent, but they're destroying the property and the functionality of the property for everybody else around them. And these small things don't seem big, but here's why they are.
Yeah. I think the judges will understand it, because the judges have an interest in having a clean and safe community.
Yeah.
Some of these places are not far from the judge's office. They're walking distance sometimes.
Yeah.
These are their constituents, and the constituents for the judge, the ones that vote, are the good tenants that are victimized by the too much noise, the police visiting all the time, the unregistered cars in the driveways. They don't want this any more than you, the landlord, does. And what I have seen, the judges, when you're actually on top of your communities and cleaning them up, the judges are on your side. They want to help. They recognize you're cleaning up your community, and they like to see the progress.
Right.
So don't be passionate. The landlords, in many cases, all they think about is, well, I'm never going to get the money anyway. I'll tell them how much is due. We'll kick them out, and we'll not worry about it. Or they haven't done an inspection until after they're gone. I think you should do an inspection before the hearing. Give them notice if you have to under your lease. Inspect the inside. Write up everything you see.
So I got a question for you there. This is where I think a lot of landlords, myself included, with my own properties and managing others. Junie, you can probably speak to this. A lot of times, by the time you get to eviction court, there's a whole lot of other interactions, negative interactions, oftentimes, where when you say, "Hey, I'm coming over to inspect the property," they might just say, "Well, make sure that you're armed and you bring an escort." You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Oh, it's not easy. Yeah.
Well, and that's the point, I guess, is like, it's not easy, but you still have to do it, and maybe really it's like setting the precedent where, look, if we get to the point where you're in default of your lease, I am going to come and inspect this property. I'm letting you know right now. And if I have to bring a law enforcement officer with me, I will do that, but we don't want to get there. I mean,
I think if you do inspections, even, and I'm not saying you should start inspecting every unit all the time, but if you stay on top of things,
we'll just move in with them.
Well, but if you stay on top of things early, it often doesn't get to this point.
Right.
Often, I think the situations that have been the worst are where a landlord lets things go and is too nice. The cases where I've made the most money, that's what's bad for landlords, is when I'm making money. cases where I've made the most money is where a bank has foreclosed on a community and turned it over to a management company. The management company gets me involved, and we find all the previously ignored problems now have to be dealt with.
Right.
Whereas if you're on top of it and they know you're on top of it, they're less likely to become belligerent with you because you get them used to it. You train your tenants to expect, at the very least, they have to live up to certain standards. And if the neighborhood looks good too, your other units look good, they'll realize they have to live up to this. Not always comfortable. You can't just sit back or stay in your home and wait to collect a check. That's not what it's about. You guys know that.
Yeah.
You guys preach that yourselves. I'm not preaching to the choir here, but that's really what we have to think, how we have to think about this.
Gotcha.
And if we're going to make the best of a bad situation, this moratorium is a bad situation, but I think we could come out of it stronger if we educate ourselves along the lines of what I'm talking about.
Well, all right, David, we're running a little bit long here today.
Okay.
And as we did the last time, there's a ton of people with a ton of comments and interest in this. So let's say I have a property or a tenant that I got to evict.
Mm-hmm.
How do I get in touch with you? Because frankly, I don't know if I want to, go out and try to learn all of the laws and all the things I got to jump through, at least on the first one. How do people contact you?
My number, can I give out my phone number?
Yeah, please.
717-730-3775.
730.
3775.
All right. All right. So I'm going to have this streaming on the bottom here. Hold on. Let's see if this is working. There we go. So you can get a hold of David, 717-730-3775. That's going to be it for today. If you are looking for something to do over the weekend or next week, we have a really great event that is starting on Monday. Judah, we're doing a 5-day challenge. We're calling it flipping houses without cash, credit, or criminal behavior. We got to stay within the law. But it's free. If you want to attend, we're going to be talking about this current market, how to find the houses, how to find the contracts, flipping deals without any of that stuff. Next week, every day. Judy, you want to jump in?
How would I get registered for such an event?
That's right. Just go to the website, buildandgrowwithrealestate.com. It's buildandgrowwithrealestate.com. We'll get you signed up. There's no cost here. There's nothing for sale. We're just, we're just trying to get a little bit deeper in some content that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. Great.
Can I add a final comment?
Yeah, please.
As a result of the last program, I found out today my teenage daughter subscribes to your podcast now.
Oh, I love it. Awesome.
She has no interest in real estate, but she found it interesting. So hopefully you're gaining interest and doing well.
Oh, I love it. Well, look, we've increased our viewership every time you've been on. I love it.
Well, I'm glad to help. I'm
glad you on every day. All right. Hey, Facebook, David and Judah, you guys have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday at noon. Until then, go make some money and sign up for the 5-day challenge. See you guys.
All right, thank you.